When you were a kid, did you ever ask your parents to take you to Disney World? I did. Every single kid wants to go to Disney World, right? I remember when I went for the first time, I was 4 years old with my parents. There's a picture of me getting ready to go. I've got all my gear on, right? My Lightning McQueen Crocs, my Lightning McQueen backpack there. I'm ready to go. And when my family took me and my siblings to Disney for the first time, we went completely free. That's right. Not only did we go for free, we had a special pass that got us past all the lines. We had our own golf cart that we could use to cart ourselves around the park so we didn't have to walk. We had all of the food that a family of six could possibly imagine, which is a lot of food. And we had an amazing time. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, like, who is this kid, right? Like, that's the red carpet. And he must be really, really, really lucky. And you'd be completely right. I was and am a very lucky person. And I didn't go to Disney because I won the Super Bowl or the PGA World Cup. I went to Disney because I won the lottery. I really did. In fact, I won the lottery twice. When I was in high school many years later, I was sitting in my social studies class, and this kid in my class, his name was Ethan, he made a joke. Ethan yelled from across the room, calling me a Make-A-Wish kid for asking a dumb question in class. Now, this was the first time I had ever associated Make-A-Wish in a negative context. But it was supposed to burn, right? It was supposed to kind of rile me up, hurt my feelings a little bit. But I wasn't hurt at all. I really wasn't, because as I sat in that classroom, all I could think about was all of the times I thought as a young kid, as a young boy, that I might not make it to high school. All of the times that my parents were told that I probably wouldn't make it past 4 years old. All of the times that I was constantly reminded how rare I was, how I had struck the genetic lottery with a disease that was 1 in 1,000,000. So rare, in fact, that I actually was a Make-A-Wish kid, and grateful to be a Make-A-Wish kid. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, like, what did you say to Ethan, right? Did you correct him? Did you get angry at him? Well, the answer is no, I didn't. In fact, I'm just going to send him this TED Talk later today. Uh, but it's because I'm grateful to be alive. More importantly than anything, I am grateful to be one of the few Make-A-Wish kids that has the privilege of standing up on this stage today. I have the exceptional honor of being one of the kids that, by the grace of God, has the honor of making it out of the hospital alive. In fact, I can even remember the first doctor that ever saw me, the doctor who discovered my illness by a complete accident. I was 4 years old and I was sitting there with my parents. It's one of the earliest memories I have from my childhood. And it just so happened to be that day that the doctor's office was testing out a new blood pressure machine. And I was the first patient that they ever tested it on in a small pediatric doctor's office in Dallas, Texas. And when they took my blood pressure, then what they saw shocked them into disbelief. It made the doctors think that the machine that they were just now testing for the first time was completely broken. Because at 4 years old, my blood pressure was so high that I was actively on the verge of a heart attack. My blood pressure was over 185 beats per minute. For a 4-year-old child, that would put me into stroke. And so naturally, the doctors assumed that the machine was mistaken. And so they took my blood pressure again and again and again. And finally, they took it manually at the request of my mother, who was so upset that the machine was clearly broken. and yet it wasn't. By the end of it, my arm was swelling, and after hours of poking and prodding around and scans of my body, the doctors determined then that there was nothing they could do. In fact, if you look up on the screen, you can see there's a picture of my heart and my aorta. I'm kid number 4 out of 11, and truthfully, I don't know how many of these kids are still around today. I could be the only one. And as you look up on the screen, you can see there's an arrow there pointing on the picture of the right side there. It's pointing at my aorta. It's a part of my aorta that's called a stenosis, which is a part that is smaller than it's supposed to be, right? So small, in fact, that the doctors described it as the size of pencil lead. And so what was a routine doctor's visit for a 4-year-old child became a terrifying discovery. In fact, it got so bad that my parents were pulled along into a separate doctor's office by the doctor that was looking at me. And he pulled my parents and he told them, he said, he gave them advice that had they listened to, I wouldn't be here today. He said to go home and enjoy the time with their son because there was nothing they could do. And because I was 4 years old and I was small, I was fragile, I was high risk, no doctor would ever want to do surgery on me. The stakes were just simply too high. And yet, my parents were relentless. For my parents, giving up on me was simply never an option. And if you're a parent in the room, if you're a parent watching this, then you know that you would never take that advice. In fact, my parents to this day were so offended that the doctor would even suggest giving up on their 4-year-old child that they went and saw doctor after doctor after doctor until they found the one doctor willing to do surgery on me. 16 doctors later, they found one doctor willing to do surgery on me. Because at the end of the day, my parents didn't want a sob story. They wanted their son. And so my parents kept searching. And by the grace and mercy of God, they found a doctor by the name of James Stanley willing to do surgery on me. In fact, Dr. Stanley, who's still alive today, came out of retirement twice to do surgery on me. And when my dad answered the phone, he remembers it. He would tell me as a child how it happened. And he would say, when Dr. Stanley spoke to him on the phone, he said, I can do surgery on your son. But this is only going to be the beginning of his journey. So get ready. And he was completely right. I have been poked and prodded probably more times than I could possibly count. I've had hundreds upon hundreds of times I've been given shots, my blood taken, IVs. From the time I was 4 until I was 14, I had 10 years of being in and out of the hospital and collectively had 4 major reconstructive surgeries. And throughout all of those surgeries, there were moments where I flatlined and I was gone. And they'd have to bring me back. And so naturally, it was one of the hardest moments for my family's life. In fact, I was even featured in an esteemed medical journal. That's right. Now, normally I don't mention the fact that I was a patient in the journal and not the doctor. But that doesn't keep me from putting it on my resume, by the way. Because I was and am today a professional patient. I had gone from the time I was 4 years old till I was 14, surgery after surgery after surgery. And by the grace of God, am here today. In fact, I can remember the first surgery that I ever had. I can remember my parents holding my hand before surgery. I can remember specifically my mom who would walk with me as the team of nurses would crash into my room, and they would take me to the operating room. And as we'd get to the two metal doors to the operating room, my mom would be there all the way through holding my hand, and she would look at me and she would say, "I love you, but get this, you got to be a trooper. You have to be a trooper." And so I was. I can remember at 4 years old, palming my hands, gritting my teeth as the doctors wheeled me into the operating room, and how I would think to myself then, how I have to be a trooper. I have to get through this. And so when it came time for me to breathe in the nasty anesthesia, and it was so bad. It was so bad. I would breathe it in, and I would tell myself then, I have to be a trooper. I just simply have to get through this. And when I'd wake up from surgery and I'd look my parents in the eyes, my mom would look at me, my dad would look at me, and they would say, "You are a trooper." Now, fast forward 10 years later, my fourth and final surgery, I'm 14 years old at this point, and I'm tired, right? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to be done. I just want to be like every other kid. I don't want to be the sick kid that's in the hospital, right? I want to play sports. And when I woke up from surgery, this was the hardest surgery of my life. It was actually the most life-threatening surgeries that I had experienced yet. And when I woke up from a coma, I was asleep for so long I had to learn to walk again. I'd have to retrain my legs. And I continuously went through this process during my life of having to overcome physical challenges with the mindset of having to be a trooper, just like my mom told me when I was 4 years old. And so in my time as a professional patient, there are 3 lessons that I want to share with you that have applied to every aspect of my life, and I believe they can and will apply to your life. Whether you're a parent with a child in the hospital who's struggling, who you're unsure is going to pull it out, or a kid like me who's 1 in a million, with a 1 in a million chance of survival. The kid that doctor after doctor said there's no way he'll make it through. The first lesson from my story is to be relentless. Right? If my parents had given up on me the first time, I wouldn't be up on this stage. Because my parents were relentless. For my parents, giving up was simply never an option. They would have kept fighting. They would have kept pushing forward because they were relentless. The second lesson from my life is to be a trooper. Now, this is especially true if you're a kid like me who at one point got sick and tired of having to be the sick kid. But sometimes the people in your life, they matter to you enough that you have to be a trooper. You have to pull through. So lean on the people in your life to be a trooper. Look at your parents, look at your sisters, look at your brothers, look at the people that matter to you the most, and let them tell you, you have to be a trooper. And tell yourself, you have to be a trooper. I have to be a trooper. The third story, the third lesson really from my life is to be bold, right? If my parents didn't have the boldness, if I didn't have the boldness to keep going, who knows where I would be? I can remember again from when I was 14, my fourth and final surgery. I had to learn to walk again, and I was afraid I wouldn't be able to fit in with other kids. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to physically keep up until I took my first step. And then another step. And then another. And slowly but surely, I adapted this mindset of overcoming, and I began to run. Because here's the thing, right? When you have to learn to walk again, you're not satisfied with just walking. You want to run. And speaking of running, I'm going to run on over to Disney World. Thank you.